Busting Indie Myths Part 30, and in this Busting Indie Myths we are going to examine the oft-heard Indie myth that the Parliament at Westminster is the English Parliament, it's not the British Parliament, and to that we will say that, sir, you are mistaken, because it's the British government, not the English government. Now, some people will say, Alistair, that's an awfully obvious point. Why would you even mention the fact that the Parliament at Westminster is British and not English? Well, the reason that I mention it is because you'll get people who are SNP MPs who have taken to referring to it as the English Parliament or the English government, or insinuating and implying that it's English and not British. Let me give you a for instance, and I came up with the necessity to point this out when I read this article. Cherry, by which is meant Joanne Cherry, SNP MP, Lord Advocate role has to be split. Now, the point of the article is that the Lord Advocate in Scotland shouldn't be part of the SNP administration, and I agree with that. But what was interesting is the way that she started talking about it. She wrote, I believe it is important that the role of Chief Prosecutor be free from all suspicion of political interference. That, after all, is what the English government enjoys. She says that, after all, is what the English, Welsh and Irish governments enjoy. Note she talks about it as the English government. Now, she knows very well that it's the British government for all of the United Kingdom. She knows that, but she also knows that her supporters don't necessarily make the distinction. And she knows that if she plays on that idea that it's English government down at Westminster rather than British government, then she can play on that Scottish-English tension, she can appeal to her supporters, and she can start to generate the resentment that can develop from that. And so she deliberately misdescribes, wrongly describes the British government at Westminster as being the English government, because she knows that's appealing to the crowd, as it were. But as we know, there is no separate English government, and there's not actually a Scottish government either. It's an administration, it's an executive, it's an arm of the one and only British government. And we also know that that British government has a Secretary of State for Scotland who can ultimately call the shots, as we saw last year. And as we mention in our book, One Big Country, a big book for the Union, Volume 1. So always be aware that the SNP will try to confuse the constitutional issue deliberately, because they know that most of their supporters don't necessarily know about the Constitution, and so they want to play upon the England-Scotland tension in order to increase resentment among their supporters and among those who don't know any better. And that's a bad move on their part, but we've got to see it for what it is. So when people like Joanne Cherry tell you or speak about the English government, they are of course referring to the British government. It's the British government, not the English government. There ends Busting Indie Myths, Part 30.